Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Well, this is a very different kind of a show. It's not entertainment, and it's not medical, but it is important. And how many of you, I know many people fly in airlines all the time, but how many of you actually will admit that you have a fear of flying? I don't really have a fear of flying, but, I've been curious about some of that, but I do know a lot of people that do. So I found a fantastic guy, and he actually is the senior pilot of a major U.S. airline. He's been doing this over 30 years. His name is Woody Tomlinson. Thanks for coming to the show, Woody.
Good morning.
Good morning. And, when I think about this, most people will not say to you after they find out that you're a pilot, "Oh, I'm afraid of flying." Will they admit that?
Believe it or not, more often than you think. People will admit their apprehension, and then they'll have some questions or two.
Right.
And hopefully that's what you'll do, is ask me those questions. And
Maybe.
I can make somebody out there feel better.
Or make something up.
Of course.
Okay, so let's talk, though, about, before the terrorists came, I'm sure people had a fear of flying, but now I can see people are probably more nervous. So I asked Woody when we had some private conversations, well, how about getting into the cockpit? And you gave me this whole story, so why don't you go back on that?
Prior to 9/11, it was a completely different environment. Obviously, flying is an enjoyable experience and can be, and we were very open as far as having a pleasurable experience to come to the cockpit and show you all the dials and pushes and pulls and all the things that we do. But post 9/11, obviously our world has changed for all of us, but particularly in our industry. Obviously, we were at the tip of the spear. We were attacked, and now our attitude toward cockpit visits are still very open on the ground. We still allow people to come up, particularly the kids. We like to have the kids come up, or anybody with curiosity.
You have little wings you give them?
We do. We have wings that we give away. But now once we get airborne, it's verboten. We don't allow anybody to even come near the cockpit. When we go to the restroom, as an example, which some of you may have seen, the flight attendants will pull the aisle carts, and they'll block the door. There's a whole series of mechanisms that we now have in place that at all cost we protect the cockpit. So if there's any ruckus in the back, any airborne aggravation or anything that's going on out of the norm, passenger aggravation or whatnot, first thing we do is secure the cockpit door. And we have procedures that are written for that.
Now, do you have a procedure in case somebody is pregnant and their water breaks and they're going to give birth? Are you allowed to come out there?
No, we are not.
No, they're on their own.
We are not. Now, what we do is that we can make a PA, or we have the flight attendants make a public address where we ask for doctors or medical people on the airplane or whatnot, because obviously we've had that happen many, many times.
Oh, have you?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That should be interesting.
Yes. Well, we've had, flying, particularly the international kind of flying that I do, you're airborne so long, we've had all kind of medical events. And, of course, the good one is childbirth. So they don't always end up that way. Sometimes they're critical in nature, and we have to land at an airport, that's not our intended destination because of the critical nature of the patient. But, yeah, we're still – something that we lose is the fact that we are in the customer service business, even though sometimes all of our experiences aren't really customer service friendly because of post 9/11, which is what we're talking about. But, if someone's ill – we have medical training, the flight attendants do. We have a medical kit on the airplane. There's certain things that we can do within an envelope. And then, of course, we always ask for medical help. And then we have the ability to, even though it's somewhat off topic, we have the ability to contact a company that we work with that has doctors on staff 24/7. And then we have defibrillators on the airplane, so forth and so on. So it's all that behind-the-scenes stuff that a lot of people don't worry or they're not concerned about.
Right.
And nor should you be.
The most concern is when they come and they say, if you're sitting in the seat right next to the, that exit or that
emergency exit row.
Can you handle that?
That's right.
And I guess there are people who do get up and say, no, I can't do that.
You see that, but most people want to sit there because you get a little extra leg room.
Oh, okay.
That's why people want to sit in those two rows.
So have you ever had your plane go where you needed to use that?
No, you know what? In over 30 years, knock on wood, it's no different than any other line of work that you have some days that are better than others, and you're always confronted with certain events. But I've never had to evacuate an airplane. Now watch. Now the next time I go to work, that'll happen.
Of course, I just saw Sully, so you know why it's on my mind.
No, it's the training that we go through that should make people very comfortable, because although I've not experienced that, we've had hours and hours, and it's regular training. It's on an annual basis that we train for those events, those eventualities, those possible eventualities. So it's not from a lack of preparation.
Okay, so I know we're going to talk about fear of flying, but I just decided I was going to go way, way, way back in time as a kid, when you were a kid.
Right.
And why you like to fly and how this all came about.
You know why? You have a beautiful blue dress on this morning, and it happens to be my favorite color.
Oh, my.
And why I like blue was probably not a choice of mine. That just happens to be my favorite color. So why does someone get involved in something, particularly as a profession? It's like being a sailor. I kind of draw the analogy. How does someone get the allure of the sea, right? So as a kid, for some reason, the airplanes flew over the house, and I just fell in love with it. And
where did you grow up?
Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh.
And so, how all that and how that comes to fruition, because most people, or a lot of people, are not fortunate enough to end up with something that they truly love, because then it's not work. And so that's where I'm at, truly blessed to be doing something that I've enjoyed as a passion, and a lot of us pilots would do for free. Now, don't tell anybody that.
Right. No, but that's a wonderful story. Would you say most pilots, they fell in, or were pilots really ones that were in the war, they came back, and that's why they wound up in commercial flying?
Well, what happens is, even in the military, people, you gravitate to that because you love it. There are a few. I have run across a few pilots in my career that did it more as a job, as just a vocation, because we have to do something. But most of us, a high percentage, it's a passion. It's like a sailor. If you ask the captain of a ship after 40 years, why does he still continue to do that? It's because he's drawn to the sea.
Well, I ask you that. It's interesting because my husband, who has recently passed away, was a pilot on B-17s, and I think I told you, flew 35 missions. And when he was finished, they had all these new plans for him, and he says, no, I'm finished. I don't want to do this again. Of course, he had a cushy job. He was over in Southern California, and he was in charge of all the R&R for the, he met all the famous actors and actresses and singers, so that wasn't bad. But he never had an inkling to fly again. So I don't know if that was because
he would have been
danger.
In that 2% probably, that because of circumstances of the war, being in the military, he ended up being a pilot. Fate.
Yeah.
A large percentage of us do it because we love it. We're drawn to it. I don't know if it's the smell of the kerosene, the environment, whatever it is. Like my little mom told me, God rest her soul, there's no heavy lifting.
That's
so,
true.
She said, no heavy lifting. So I'm not surprised you want to be a pilot.
Well, the nice thing, though, I think, is that when we started talking about fear of flying, and you have a lot of things that you have to tell people about that. And why don't you share that for those listening who say, yeah, well, I still fly. I mean, actually, there are people who don't fly and won't fly. They have to take a train or a car. Right. That's real serious fear of flying, isn't it?
Right. And I think what happens, and just from my perspective, which obviously is different than the layman, obviously I know the ins and outs, and I'm very comfortable with it because I do know the details, and most of us are somewhat analytical. It's usually the lack of information, or someone has had a life experience, or someone has said something in their childhood or whatever that has disconnected them from the reality of what flying really is. And, I mean, fear is real. It's a perception. And I think a little bit of knowledge can go a long way when you don't know something that can make the world the small place that it is today. And if we could unlock some of that and maybe dispel some of these fears. First of all, we need to acknowledge that fear is real, and flying has risk. But so does every other aspect of life. Getting in and out of the shower. We all know people that have tripped over the garden hose in the backyard and ended up in the hospital. So something as, innocuous as that. So the upside to flying, whether it's visiting the grandkids or seeing the Great Wall of China, if you'll just have a little effort and listen to some of us that kind of have an idea of what we're talking about, I think we can quantify those risks and make them acceptable, mitigate some of the fear. Maybe we may not be able to get rid of all of it initially, but we can get it to a tolerable point where you can go see the grandkids. I mean, isn't that what that's all about? If you won't get on an airplane because your grandkids live in Montana and we live here in South Florida, I mean, that's really tragic in itself. Yeah, that you're missing out on life.
And the thing that I have really enjoyed, though, of course, flying so many years ago, this wasn't as luxurious as it is now. Now the seats are gorgeous. You have a little TV in front of you, and there's of course, we used to get food. We don't get the food. We get a little snacks, but most of us stop and get food. But people meet people on planes. I have a cousin who fell in love with someone sitting next to her.
Really?
Yeah, right. So that's another good place to find good people, right? Except you don't get to choose your person.
Seatmate,
hey, I don't want to sit there. I want to sit there next to him.
That's right.
But still, it can. I guess I have the kind of fate thing that, look, as you said, I could be in a car and it could happen. I'm on the plane and I'm sure that everything's going to be fine. And I just tell myself that. And if it isn't, well, it isn't. But I don't worry about it. But the whole problem now with people with terrorism, they start worrying because there's so much before they get on the plane that they have to do. They have to have their bags inspected. They have to have, their shoes inspected and all that. How does that affect you all? Does you?
Well, believe it or not, after 9/11, I didn't realize that day that watching the airplanes, fly into the World Trade Towers would actually have the impact on my life that it has. So not only as a member of society, but in the airline business, because it affected our industry, we were the tip of the spear, so to speak. It's been a dramatic impact for the last 15 years. The things that we've go through now, the aggravation, as an employee going to the airport used to be relatively simple. Now, in some cities across the globe, it might take us an hour from the time they drop us off at the airport before we actually get to the cockpit. It's been said many, many times, well, the hard part of the trip's over.
Now, are you saying that you have to go through security?
Absolutely.
Oh, really?
People should feel they should get a certain sense of security that we are not bypassed. We're not bypassed from a background check, fingerprinting. They want to know who we are, where we came from. Every pilot in the aircraft in the U.S. airline industry today has gone through a rigorous background check. Now, it's just like anything else. It's not foolproof, but there's a very high sense of confidence that they know who the individuals are that are driving these airplanes around. So if you start with that, and then we work backward to the flying passenger, unfortunately, we all watch television. It's a 24-hour news cycle now. I travel internationally extensively, so what just happened in London recently, on the bridges, stood on that bridge last week. And the guy that I was with, my cohort, my flying companion, we both looked at each other and said, you just have to keep your head on a swivel. So having said that, we're not debilitated. We just need to be aware. And that's one of the mechanisms that we use in combating this terrorism that's absolutely affecting us globally.
I just want everyone to know, if you've just jumped in, we're having a great conversation with Woody Tomlinson. He's a senior pilot, the major U.S. airline. He's been doing this over 30 years, and I had met him. He's actually a personal friend, and I was so fascinated by his career. I said, would you come on the radio show? And he said, why? What would I talk about? I said, are you kidding? There's so much to talk about. So I wanted this go through something that you told me, because I was saying, with all the mechanisms underneath the plane, how are you sure that every little hose and every little bolt is okay? I'm sure you don't worry about it for some reason.
Well, you know what it is? The airline industry is a ballet. How do your bags get to the airplane? How do you get to the airplane? Look at the mechanism that you go through and what you see. Well, we have a similar ballet that we go through. we put our lives, as well as you do, in the hands of the people that we work with, the mechanics and their policies and procedures. The airline manufacturers, they don't want to build airplanes that crash because that's not a good business model either. So we do our jobs, and our jobs have procedures that validate that all the hoses and the tire pressure and the paint and the window panes and all of that stuff works like it's supposed to. So we do our job. We absolutely have faith in the fact that the mechanics do theirs and the fuelers do theirs. The dispatchers who help us pre-flight, the planning as far as fuel requirements and anticipated turbulence and all those things that we're inundated with, that's what we do. We manage those factors. And at the end of the day, when they close the door and we push off the gate, all of those things come together. So, yes, we do a pre-flight check. One of our pilots does a walk around, and he has a flashlight, and he looks at all the nooks and crannies of the airplane. But he's only doing it in a secondary way because we're getting on the airplane. We're going to go fly it. Some mechanic or a mechanic who has qualifications and a license has already done that before we have. And so it's like a bunch of trains leaving the station, and we all have to come together. And we do, and that's why I say it's a ballet. If any one of those things, people don't, if you really want to look at it, the fact that the food has to come to the airplane, it's an important, integral part of what we do because we're in the customer service business. If the food doesn't come, we don't go. If the fuel doesn't come, we don't go. If we're a pilot short or a flight attendant short, and all of those logistical things, and it is a lot of logistics, they all have to come together at the end of the day. And that's why the airline industry is professional by nature.
And as a captain, does it all fall on you? The very final thing.
Let me tell you, somebody has to be the boss. Somebody has to be the conductor of the orchestra. And if there's an issue or validation in this case, you want to make sure that all the squares are filled, all the check boxes are checked, and that's really what we do. But let me reiterate this because it's very important. It is a team effort, and it's never has been, nor will it ever be, a one-man show. Yes, does someone have to say when a decision needs to be made about something? Usually the smart guys, the experienced guys, take the individuals, their opinions around him. 4 heads or 3 heads or 2 heads are always smarter than one. And so it's generally run in a diplomatic. We have training and procedures that we use because I want your perspective. I want you to, if you're seeing something differently than I am, or if you have a life experience and an aviation experience that may be different than mine, this is the time for you to say, hey, I've seen this before, and this is not what was happening, or this is what was happening. And a qualified, experienced guy will always take all that information into account and then make his decision accordingly.
That's good. So your ego doesn't
look, we have guys that have bigger egos than others, but generally at the end of the day, it's homogenized to the point where this is what we do. And we make those kind of decisions accordingly.
So, Woody, I've been on transcontinental flights where when I start off, it's light, and as we're flying, it's dark. Would you rather fly in daylight than nighttime? How do you fly at nighttime? Is it just all depends on your
I have seen some of the most beautiful sights during the daytime and nighttime. I've never been asked that question. It's not really a preference, or I don't have a preference. Fortunately or unfortunately, in the type of flying that I'm doing now, the international flying, I get to experience a little of both. Because we're flying such long distances. If we're going to Asia and you take off in the afternoon, you chase the sun all day and the sun never goes down. If you're going to Europe and you take off in the evening, you may have taken off in the dark, and at 2 o'clock in the morning on your body clock here in South Florida, the sun comes up. So you see some of the evening, some of the night, and then some of the early morning, which is absolutely breathtaking when you see the sun come up over the North Atlantic. So to answer your question, now if you're flying domestically, some guys on their body clock, they'd rather work in the morning. They'd rather have banker's hours and come to work early and get off early. Or they'd rather come to work in the afternoon and work until 11 o'clock at night or whatever their body clocks are. And that's all preference. That's more of just how do you feel when you come to work. I hate to admit I'm not an early bird. I'm not an early riser. So my preference would be to go to work in the afternoon and finish in the evening. That just happens to be when I'm at my best. But, hey, we all know guys that like to get up early. That's just not me.
Okay, and the other question I have is about weather. And I just came from, and we talked about this. I was stuck in Atlanta because they had terrible storms there, and they kept us, said no. And I felt, even though people were complaining, I said, that's good. I don't want to fly if there's any danger. And you told me about how you fly up, you fly to the side, you fly down. Go through that with people.
Well, first of all, weather is a part of flying. Here in South Florida, it's in the summer today that we're taping this. We have rain showers that we can anticipate more often than not in the afternoon. It's just a phenomenon that we have. So if you're coming to South Florida as a pilot and they say that there's rain showers in the forecast, you're pretty much anticipating that. And we plan for it. We plan for it from a fuel profile in case we have to do a little deviation is what we call it. If we have to go this way a little further and that way, and we kind of find our way into South Florida without flying through the storms, because we don't. Now, when you have 90% sky coverage and it's raining all day in South Florida, obviously you're going to get wet. But we have training. We have equipment in the airplane. I'm sure most of you have heard that we have weather radar. And in today's technological environment, it is wonderful. It's like the new phones that we have and what they do. Well, all of that has obviously made its way into our industry. We're very technically oriented.
So you never use Siri to know where you're going like I do.
Let me tell you something. As an old guy, if Siri has something to say, I'll listen to her. If she can give me a little nugget of information that I didn't have. But no, that's
I'm kidding.
And so, and that's really what we do. Now, some days we take off and we know that we're going into inclement weather. And we try to tell the people that so that you can so that it doesn't catch you by surprise. It's back to that relationship that I think we could embellish more from the cockpit to the flying customer, is that when we can anticipate something that I can tell you, hey guys, in a couple of hours, we're going to be on time, but it's raining in South Florida and we're anticipating some bumps. We may have the flight attendants prepare the cabin a little early and whatnot so that they're not getting jiggled around. And, that way, so that 30 minutes when I tell you that, hey, we're 30 minutes from landing and we're getting ready to descend and, it's raining at Fort Lauderdale. You're kind of with us. You're kind of up to speed, that it doesn't catch you by surprise that all of a sudden now you look out the window and you see all the raindrops and the airplane's getting jiggled around a little bit. So that's really what we do. But the weather phenomena is whether in the wintertime it's a low visibility landing requirement, which people all the time want to ask me now because of the airplanes that we're flying, well, they fly themselves. Well, they really do. They don't take themselves off, but they more often than not have the ability to land themselves. But we're there. We have to configure the airplanes and push the buttons in the right order to get it to do that. But the airplanes today are so safe, and the fourth, fifth generation of landing systems that we now have, the pilots, the airport, and the airplane all have to be up to speed to be able to make those low visibility landings. But so whether it's the wintertime or the summertime, they all have their own certain confluence of events that we have to go through. But that's what we do. We do that 365 a year, 24 hours a day. There's airplanes that are flying. And if you just look at the safety records today of the global airlines, but particularly let me really say how good the U.S. airlines have done in the last couple of decades. I hate to bore people with the statistics because your eyes glaze over, but the bottom line is that it's an extraordinarily safe industry. And that's not by happenstance. It starts with the manufacturer. It starts with the training of the individuals that are operating the airplane. And, the government and the air traffic control system, they deserve some accolades as well. But we all work together, and we're always working. There's always a process to make it even more safe. But the airline industry right now is an extraordinarily safe way to travel.
I'm sure people who started listening and they were worried about, the fear of flying, I hope that this has alleviated some of their fear. I told you before I don't have the fear of flying, but you have really helped me, even if I went off a little bit and said, I was a little worried. No, because I was maybe worried about weather a little bit, but you made me feel better about that. The other thing is that the the people on board, your staff, well, let's say the stewardesses and the...
But we don't call them stewardesses
I know you
anymore.
Don't. I'm sorry.
Flight attendants.
Flight attendants.
There we go.
Me, sorry. But they are really very nice, and they're very helpful, and I think that there has been a lot of training going on, but the nicest thing that I like is when the pilot welcomes everybody, and then when we're leaving, they're standing there outside the cockpit, and they're so nice. And I always try to say, thank you, that was a great flight, because we like to see who you all are. Only
if we made a good landing. If we made a bad landing, we don't stand out there so much.
Well, I'm sure that, it's wonderful to have you in this industry, and it sounds like you have a lot of people, your other colleagues, who feel the same way, and that someday, hopefully, I'm going to fly on one of your planes.
I would love to have you. That'd be a wonderful experience. And of course, I would try to embarrass you by making a PA and calling you out.
I love when you do that now with veterans or some things.
Absolutely.
That's very special that you do that.
That's exactly
well, this has been great, Woody. I'm really so happy that you took the time. I know you have a busy schedule, but I know a lot of people are very thrilled about this. And I know that I've invited Woody to write an article in Boomer Times, so you're going to be seeing and hearing him a little bit more. So thanks again.
Thank you for a pleasurable experience.